Welcome to Wild Cowboy Tales. Before we ride into a story of love, loss, and a reckoning paid in polished silver, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Go on, hit that button and ring the bell so you don't miss a single tale from the raw and tamed heart of the West. Now, find a comfortable spot and listen to the legend of the widow, a woman who forged her grief into bullets and aimed them at the heart of injustice. The love between Amelia and Jacob Thorne was a quiet, sturdy thing, like the log cabin they had built with their own hands in the shadow of the Dragon Mountains. It was a love born not of flowery words or grand gestures, but of shared sunrises, the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other's souls, and the simple, profound joy of building a life from the unforgiving Arizona soil. Jacob was a man of the earth, strong and kind, his hands calloused from the pickaxe, and his eyes holding the patient optimism of a prospector. Amelia, with a spirit as resilient as the prairie grass and a smile that could charm a rattlesnake, was the heart of their small homestead. Their life was not easy, but it was rich in the ways that mattered. It was their own. That all changed with the glint of gold in the bottom of a dusty creek bed. It wasn't a massive strike, not the kind that started a rush and built a city overnight, but it was enough. Enough to secure their future, to buy the prize bull Jacob had always wanted, to perhaps even build a real frame house with glass windows. It was the physical manifestation of their shared dream. Jacob, being an honest and trusting man, did what the law required. He rode into the nearby, burgeoning town of Redemption to file his claim. Redemption was a town built on a lie, a place run by a trinity of corrupt power. At its head was Judge Marcus Thorne, a man whose silver hair and tailored suits belied a heart as black and cold as a winter midnight. He was the law, the founder, and the silent owner of nearly everything in town. His right hand was Sheriff Brody, a brute with a tin star and a loyalty that could be bought for a bottle and a handful of coins. And handling the town's finances was Cyrus Blackwood, the banker, a man whose smile was as thin as his soul, and whose ledgers were works of pure fiction. When Jacob Thorne, with his dusty clothes and honest face, walked into the assayer's office with a pouch of gleaming gold dust, he was a lamb walking into a den of wolves. He filed his claim, the paper signed and stamped, a legal document he believed would protect his dream. He didn't see the look that passed between the clerk and Sheriff Brody, who was conveniently lounging in the corner. He didn't know that news of his strike would be on Judge Thorne's desk before the ink on his own claim was dry. The betrayal was swift and brutal. A week later, 3 riders appeared at the Thorne homestead. Amelia was tending her garden when she saw them, 3 dark figures silhouetted against the setting sun. She recognized Sheriff Brody immediately, his bulk unmistakable. The other 2 were strangers, hard-faced men with the dead eyes of hired guns. Jacob met them on the porch, his hand resting warily on the axe handle leaning against the wall. "Sheriff," he said, his voice calm but tight. "What can I do for you?" "Evening, Thorne," Brody grunted, not bothering to dismount. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "There's been a discrepancy with your claim." "Discrepancy? I filed it proper. It's all legal." "That's the thing about the law out here, Jacob," the sheriff sneered. "It's a flexible instrument. The judge has reviewed the claim. Turns out that land was already part of a prior survey, belonging to the Redemption Mining Consortium." Amelia's heart went cold. The Redemption Mining Consortium was a phantom company. Everyone knew it was just Judge Thorne. "That's a lie," Jacob said, his voice low and dangerous. "That's my land. My gold." "Not anymore," Brody said. He unrolled a document. "This is an eviction notice, signed by the judge himself. You have 24 hours to vacate the property." The rage that had been simmering in Jacob finally boiled over. "You can take that notice and your corrupt judge and go straight to hell," he snarled, taking a step forward. It was the only excuse they needed. One of the hired guns, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, drew his pistol with a practiced speed. Resisting an officer of the law, he said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Amelia screamed. The world seemed to slow down, to warp into a grotesque tableau. She saw Jacob lunge, not at the man with the gun, but at the sheriff, his hands reaching for the liar's throat. The gunshot was a deafening crack that shattered the evening calm. Jacob was thrown back against the cabin wall, a dark, blossoming stain on his chest. He slid to the porch floor, his eyes wide with shock and a final, heartbreaking look of love directed at his wife. Amelia was frozen, a silent scream trapped in her throat. The scene was a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. Brody and his men dismounted. They didn't even look at the body. They strode into the cabin, the sounds of them ransacking the home a brutal violation. They emerged a few minutes later, carrying Jacob's strongbox, where he kept his maps and the rest of the gold from his initial find. Tragic, Sheriff Brody said with a mock sigh, looking down at Jacob's body. Man got greedy, resisted the law. You'd be wise not to make the same mistake, ma'am. He looked at Amelia, his eyes cold and dismissive. Like the notice says, 24 hours. They mounted their horses and rode away, leaving Amelia alone with the cooling body of her husband, the wreckage of her home, and the ashes of her life. She sat with him all night, cradling his head in her lap as the cold of the desert night descended. The love, the warmth, the future they had built, it was all gone, stolen by a corrupt judge, a cowardly sheriff, and a hired killer. The grief that washed over her was a physical thing, a crushing weight that threatened to extinguish her. But as the first pale light of dawn touched the mountains, something else began to stir in the depths of her sorrow. It was a cold, hard ember of pure, unadulterated rage. They had not just killed her husband. They had underestimated his wife. They saw a simple homesteader, a woman they could easily discard. They did not see the steel that lay beneath the surface, the resilience forged by a hard life. She looked at the eviction notice, still clutched in her husband's hand. She saw the names: Judge Marcus Thorne, who signed the order; Sheriff Brody, who delivered it; Cyrus Blackwood, whose bank held the Phantom Company's papers; and the named man with the scar, the one who pulled the trigger. A list. She rose to her feet, her movements stiff. She gently closed Jacob's eyes. There would be time for tears later. Now was the time for a vow. She went back into the violated cabin. From a small, hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, she retrieved the one thing they had missed. It was a small, velvet pouch. Inside was a collection of silver heirlooms from her family, a pair of ornate earrings, a delicate locket, and her own silver wedding band. It was all she had left of her past. She held the cool, heavy silver in her palm. It represented love, memory, and a life of peace. But in that moment, and the crucible of her grief, it was transformed. It would become something else entirely. It would become her justice. It would become her payment. She would hunt down every man responsible for this. She would not bring them to the law, for the law was a lie. She would bring her own law to them. And for every life they had taken, she would pay them back, one by one. She would pay them in silver. The 24 hours Sheriff Brody had given Amelia to disappear were a gift. While he and his masters in redemption believed she was a broken, fleeing woman, she was instead undertaking a grim pilgrimage. She wrapped Jacob's body in their finest quilt, placed him on their mule, and walked away from the homestead, not west towards the sunset and oblivion, but north, into the jagged and forgiving wilderness of the Ghost Mountain Range. She was not running away. She was retreating to forge a new self from the ashes of the old. Her destination was a place of myth, a half-forgotten cabin belonging to a man who was more legend than reality, Elias Thorne, known in his day as the Grey Rider. He was a former lawman, a retired bounty hunter, a man who had seen the bloody workings of the West from both sides of the law and had walked away from it all in disgust. Jacob had spoken of him once, having stumbled upon the old recluse while prospecting. He described a man as weathered and as hard as the mountains themselves, a man who wanted only to be left alone. He was the only person Amelia could think of who might understand the darkness that had now taken root in her soul. The journey was a blur of grief and grim determination. She buried Jacob in a high, lonely pass overlooking the valley where they had built their life, marking the spot with a simple cross of stones. There, she finally allowed herself to weep, a storm of sorrow that left her hollowed out and empty. When the tears were gone, only the cold, hard purpose remained. She found Elias's cabin tucked into a hidden valley, a plume of smoke from its chimney the only sign of its existence. He met her on the porch, a tall, gaunt figure with eyes the color of a winter sky and a long, gray beard that seemed to hold the secrets of 100 years. He held a rifle in the crook of his arm, his posture wary. "This is private land," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "State your business." My name is Amelia Thorne, she said, her voice raw. My husband, Jacob, he spoke of you. He's dead, murdered by the men who run the town of Redemption. I've come to ask you to teach me. Elias's cold eyes softened for a fraction of a second. He had seen this look before, this terrible, burning clarity in the eyes of the wronged. Teach you what, girl? How to die? Because that's all the path of vengeance leads to. Teach me to shoot, she said, her voice unwavering. Teach me to hunt. Teach me to be the weapon they never saw coming. I'm not asking for your help in my fight. I'm just asking for the knowledge to fight it myself. He saw the iron in her spine, the unshakable resolve. He saw the ghost of a younger, angrier version of himself. With a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all the ghosts he'd ever known, he lowered the rifle. The first lesson is this, he said grimly. Once you start down this road, there's no turning back. It will cost you everything you have left. They've already taken everything, Amelia replied. I have nothing left to lose. And so began her transformation. The soft hands that had once tended a garden now learned the harsh, metallic reality of a firearm. Elias was a brutal and compromising teacher. He started her with a rifle, making her shoot at distant targets until her shoulder was a mass of bruises and she could judge windage and distance by instinct alone. Then, he moved to the revolver. It was an old, perfectly balanced Colt, a relic from his past. A pistol ain't a long gun, he drilled into her. It's a creature of instinct. You don't aim it. You point it. You feel where the bullet is going to go. It's a part of your own hand. He made her practice the draw until her muscles screamed, until the motion was so ingrained it was thoughtless. He taught her to shoot with both hands, to reload with lightning speed, to fight in the dark, to use the environment as a weapon. He stripped away her fear, her hesitation, replacing it with a cold, mechanical efficiency. But her training was more than just marksmanship. He taught her the grim arts of survival. How to track a man, how to live off the land, how to move through the wilderness without leaving a trace. He taught her tactics, the art of the ambush, the psychology of fear. He was not just teaching her to be a gunslinger, he was teaching her to be a predator. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she finally showed him the velvet pouch containing her silver heirlooms. I need one more thing from you, she said. I need you to teach me how to do this. She explained her plan. The silver was not to be sold. It was to be her calling card, her signature. Each man on her list would die by a silver bullet, a personal, symbolic payment for the life they had stolen. Elias looked at the precious metal, then at the woman's determined face. A profound sadness entered his eyes. He had seen men kill for gold, for land, for pride. But he had never seen a vengeance so personal, so ritualistic. This was not just about killing, it was an act of dark alchemy, turning love and memory into instruments of death. He took her to a small, crude forge he had built behind the cabin. He showed her how to melt the silver in a crucible, the metal glowing with a pure, white light in the intense heat. He taught her how to pour the molten silver into a special bullet mold. The process was delicate, sacred. As she watched the first of her silver earrings melt and transform, she felt a piece of her old self melt away with it. She made 4 bullets. 1 from her earrings, for the man with the scar, the hired gun. 1 from the locket her mother had given her, for Sheriff Brody, the corrupt lawman. 1 from her wedding band, the most precious of all, for Cyrus Blackwood, the banker who had betrayed their friendship. And the last, from all the remaining silver, a larger, heavier slug for a rifle, was for the man at the top, Marcus Thorne. When the 4 silver bullets lay cooling on a stone, they seemed to possess a strange, lunar beauty. They were perfect, gleaming, and impossibly deadly. They were the physical embodiment of her vow. Her training was complete. She was no longer Amelia Thorne, the homesteader. That woman was dead, buried with her husband on a lonely mountain pass. In her place was a new entity, a specter of vengeance. She dressed in practical, dark riding clothes. She took the old Colt from Elias, its holster now a familiar weight on her hip. She was leaner, harder, her face a mask of cold resolve, her eyes holding the same chilling emptiness as the old man who had trained her. The whispers began soon after. Travelers and trappers spoke of a woman, seen only from a distance, who moved through the mountains like a ghost. They said she was a phantom, seeking justice for a great wrong. The legend of the widow with the silver bullets was born in these hushed, fearful conversations, a campfire story that was about to become a terrifying reality for the men in the town of Redemption. As she prepared to ride out, Elias stood on his porch. "You know how to find them?" he asked. "I know the first one," Amelia replied. "The man with the scar. A man like that always leaves a trail of blood. I'll start there. And after him. One by one," she said, her voice as cold as the silver in her saddlebag. "Until the debt is paid." Elias watched her ride away, a lone, dark figure against the vast, indifferent landscape. He had given her the skills to enact her revenge, but he feared he had also damned her soul in the process. He had unleashed a storm on the territory, and he knew it would not end until it had washed the town of Redemption clean with blood. The first name on Amelia's ledger of death did not truly have a name, only a face dominated by the jagged, white scar that ran from his left eyebrow to the corner of his mouth, giving him a permanent, cruel sneer. He was the man who had pulled the trigger, the physical instrument of her husband's murder. Finding him was the first, crucial step in her crusade, a task that required her to descend from the clean, harsh purity of the mountains and into the murky, treacherous underbelly of the West. She did not begin her hunt in Redemption. To go there now would be suicide. Instead, she started in the border towns, the dusty, lawless settlements where men like the one she sought were common currency. She became a ghost, a quiet observer in the corners of smoky cantinas and cheap boarding houses. She learned to listen, to filter the drunken boasts and paranoid whispers for the single thread of information she needed. She was no longer Amelia. She adopted a new name, a new identity. She was Grace, a drifter, a woman of few words and sad eyes, a persona that allowed her to be overlooked, to become part of the scenery. Her break came in a town called Perdition, a place that lived up to its name. There, she heard whispers of a gunslinger known as Scar Jackson, a man known for his quick temper and his even quicker draw. He was a hired gun, currently in the employ of a wealthy cattle baron who was waging a bloody range war. The description matched. The profession matched. Amelia did not rush in. Elias had taught her that patience was a predator's greatest weapon. She spent 2 weeks learning Jackson's habits. She learned which saloon he favored, the company he kept, the route he took back to his rented room each night. She saw in him a man consumed by his own violence, a creature of brutal, simple appetites, whiskey cards, and the fear he inspired in others. He was a rabid dog, and she was going to be the one to put him down. She chose her ground carefully, a narrow and lit alleyway that ran between the saloon and the stables, a place Jackson used as a shortcut. She prepared the stage for her first act of vengeance. In her saddlebag, nestled in soft velvet, was the first of her silver bullets. She loaded it carefully into her Colt, the weight of the unique projectile feeling different, more significant, than the lead slugs she had trained with. This was real. This was the first payment. She waited in the deepest shadows of the alley, her heart a slow, steady drum in her chest. The fear she had expected to feel was absent, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. The sounds of the saloon's tinny piano, the bursts of laughter were a world away. Her world had shrunk to this dark alley and the man who was about to enter it. She heard his spurred boots on the boardwalk before she saw him. He turned into the alley, a hulking silhouette against the faint light from the street. He was drunk, but a man like Jackson was never truly off his guard. His hand hovered near his gun, a reflexive habit. "Jackson," she said, her voice low and clear, cutting through the night. He stopped, peering into the darkness. "Who's there?" he slurred, his hand tightening on the grip of his pistol. She stepped out of the shadows, not into the light, but into the slightly less dense darkness of the alley's center. He couldn't see her face clearly, only the outline of a woman holding a revolver, aimed steadily at his chest. "You don't know my name," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "But you killed my husband, Jacob Thorne. You shot him on his own porch while your sheriff friend watched." A flicker of recognition, then amusement, crossed his face. He chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "Thorne, the prospector. Hell, lady, I've killed so many men I can't be expected to remember all their names." He was in the way of business. "Nothing personal." "It was personal to me," Amelia said. The casual, dismissive way he spoke of Jacob's murder stoked the cold embers of her rage into a momentary blaze. "So you're his widow," Jackson sneered, his drunken confidence returning. He began to straighten up, shifting his weight, preparing for the draw. Come for a little revenge, have you? You've got sand, I'll give you that. But you've brought a knife to a gunfight, sweetheart. No, Amelia said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I brought your death. She saw the subtle shift in his shoulders, the tensing of the muscles in his gun hand, the exact tells Elias had drilled into her. He was fast, brutally fast. His gun was clearing the holster in a blur of motion. But Amelia was not trying to be faster. She was already there. Her gun was already aimed. She had controlled the encounter from the first word. As his barrel began to rise, she squeezed the trigger. The roar of the Colt in the narrow alley was deafening. The silver bullet, a gleaming harbinger of her vengeance, struck Jackson square in the chest. It was as if he had been hit by a sledgehammer. He was thrown backward, a look of profound shock on his face, his own unfired pistol clattering to the ground. He slid down the rough wooden wall, leaving a dark smear, a stunned, gurgling sound escaping his lips. Amelia walked slowly toward him. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and disbelief. He was trying to speak, to ask a question. She knelt beside him, her face now illuminated by the faint light, and she saw the moment he finally understood. He wasn't dying at the hands of a rival gunslinger or lawman. He was dying at the hands of a ghost he had created. Why? He rasped, blood flecking his lips. She reached into a small pouch at her belt and pulled out the spent silver casing, still warm from the firing. She pressed it into his hand. Payment, she said, her voice as cold and hard as the metal. For my husband. She stood and walked away, not looking back. She didn't wait to see the life fade from his eyes. She didn't wait for the inevitable discovery of the body. She was gone, a phantom melting back into the night. The next morning, the town of Perdition awoke to the news of Scar Jackson's death. The discovery of the body was shocking enough, but it was the details that turned a common back alley killing into a legend. The local doctor, extracting the projectile, found not a lead slug, but a misshapen slug of pure, gleaming silver. The story of the silver bullet, and the strange, warm casing found clutched in the dead man's hand, spread like wildfire. From town to town, the story was told and retold, embellished with each telling. They spoke of a woman, a widow, who was hunting the men who had wronged her. They said she was a spirit of vengeance, that she could not be killed by normal means. They began to call her the Silver Widow. Amelia, miles away, heard the whispers. She had not only killed the first man on her list, but she had successfully planted the seed of her own myth. She had created an aura of the supernatural, an armor of fear that would be as valuable to her as any bullet. But as she rode through the silent desert, the grim satisfaction of her first kill was tempered by a profound, aching loneliness. The debt had been opened. One payment had been made, but the ledger was still long, and the cost to her own soul was a price she had not yet begun to calculate. With the ghost of Scar Jackson behind her and her own legend beginning to form, Amelia turned her attention to the second name on her list, Sheriff Brody. This presented a different and far more complex challenge. Jackson had been a common predator, easily found in the wilderness of the lawless. Brody, however, was a beast that laired in the very heart of the system she sought to destroy. He was a man wrapped in the veneer of legitimacy, protected by a badge and the authority of Judge Thorne. A simple back alley execution would not suffice. To kill Brody in a straightforward gunfight would brand her as a common cop killer, undermining the very foundation of righteous vengeance she was trying to build. No, for Sheriff Brody, the punishment had to fit the crime. He had used the law as a shield for his corruption, therefore, she would have to strip that shield away, exposing the cowardly, greedy man beneath the tin star for all the world to see. Her weapon against Brody would not be just her Colt, but the truth. She began her campaign against him from a distance, becoming an invisible tormentor. She knew that redemption, under the iron fist of Judge Thorne, was a town suffocating in its own secrets. She just needed to provide the first breath of fresh air. She started small, targeting the sheriff's illicit operations. Coda, the Apache tracker from her time in the mountains, had taught her the art of the silent raid. Brody was known to be skimming from the protection money he extorted from the town's saloon and gambling dens. One night, the strongbox in his office, containing a month's worth of ill-gotten gains, simply vanished. There was no sign of forced entry. The only thing left behind on his desk was a single, spent silver casing, identical to the one found on Jackson's body. The theft sent a ripple of fear through Brody. This was not a common thief. This was a message. He grew paranoid, seeing the widow's ghost in every shadow. He started drinking more heavily, his bluster giving way to a frayed temper. Next, Amelia targeted the stagecoach line that brought supplies and payrolls to the mining consortium Judge Thorne's company. Brody received a significant cut for ensuring the safety of these shipments. Amelia didn't rob the stagecoach. She simply stopped it. On a lonely stretch of road, she appeared, a single, dark-clad figure. The guards, having heard the tales of the Silver Widow, were paralyzed with fear. She didn't draw her gun. She just handed the driver a letter. "This is for Sheriff Brody," she said, her voice carrying a chilling authority. "And this," she added, giving him a heavy sack, "is for the people of Redemption." The sack contained all of the money stolen from Brody's office. The letter, which the driver dutifully delivered, was a simple, stark message: the wealth of this town belongs to its people, not to the vultures who prey on them. Your time is coming. When the stagecoach arrived in Redemption, not with a tale of robbery, but of a strange, principled redistribution of stolen funds, the town was thrown into a state of confusion. The people, long oppressed by Thorne's regime, began to whisper. The Silver Widow wasn't just a killer, she seemed to be a force of justice. They saw their own stolen money returned, and they saw their corrupt sheriff exposed and humiliated. The first cracks in the foundation of Thorne's authority began to appear. Sheriff Brody, consumed by a mixture of terror and impotent rage, became a tyrant. He rousted innocent citizens from their beds, accusing them of conspiring with the widow. He arrested a prospector for simply owning a silver nugget. His paranoia was eroding his already thin veneer of control, and Judge Thorne, a man who prized order above all else, was growing impatient with his increasingly erratic subordinate. Amelia knew it was time for the final act. She had weakened him psychologically, undermined his authority, and turned a portion of the town against him. Now, she would force a public confrontation. She sent a final message, this time pinning it to the door of the church in the dead of night. It was addressed to the people of Redemption. It laid out the truth of her husband's murder in stark, simple terms. It named Judge Thorne, Cyrus Blackwood, and Sheriff Brody as the conspirators. It named Scar Jackson as the murderer. And it ended with a direct challenge. Your sheriff is a murderer and a thief. I will be at the Old Thorne homestead at dawn, 2 days from now. If he is a man of the law, let him come and face my justice. If he is a coward, let him hide behind the badge he has so thoroughly disgraced. The notice caused an uproar. It was a direct call-out, a public duel. Judge Thorne was furious. He ordered Brody to ignore it, to hunt her down with a posse. But Brody was trapped. To refuse the challenge would be to prove himself a coward in front of the entire town. His pride, bolstered by whiskey, made the decision for him. "I'll go," he slurred to the judge. "I'll go and I'll kill that bitch myself and drag her body back here for all to see." On the appointed morning, the homestead was shrouded in a thick, ethereal mist. Amelia stood on the porch where her husband had died, the old Colt holstered at her hip. The second silver bullet was in the chamber. Sheriff Brody did not come alone. He brought a posse of 6 deputies, hired thugs loyal to the judge's coin. He was a coward to the last. They spread out, using the old corral and outbuildings for cover, their rifles glinting in the pale dawn light. "Come on out, widow," Brody bellowed, his voice trying for a boom but cracking with nervousness. "Your murdering days are over." Amelia didn't answer with words. She answered with a rifle shot. Not at Brody, but at the bell on the old dinner triangle that hung from the porch roof. The clear, sharp clang echoed through the misty air, a sound both nostalgic and unnerving. It was a signal that she was in control. What followed was not a gunfight, but a hunt. Amelia, using every bit of the tactical knowledge Elias had taught her, became a ghost in the mist. She moved from the cabin to the barn to the creek bed, never staying in one place for more than a shot. She didn't shoot to kill the deputies, not yet. She shot to wound, to disarm, to terrify. A rifle was shot from one man's hands. Another cried out as a bullet tore through the fleshy part of his thigh. The deputies, who had signed on for easy money, quickly lost their nerve. They were fighting an unseen enemy who seemed to be everywhere at once. One by one, they broke and ran, fleeing back towards the imagined safety of town, leaving their sheriff alone. Brody, now truly terrified, took cover behind the water trough, firing his pistol wildly into the mist. "Show yourself, damn you!" he screamed, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. Amelia's voice came from all around him, a disembodied, ghostly sound in the thick air. "You're alone, Brody. Just like you left my husband to die alone." She appeared then, a specter stepping out of the mist, not 10 yards from him. She stood there, her Colt held loosely at her side. For a moment, all of Brody's fear coalesced into a single, desperate act of aggression. He brought his pistol up, his face a mask of sweat and terror. Amelia was faster. Her draw was a single, fluid motion. The Colt roared, and the silver bullet found its mark. The shot didn't kill him instantly. It struck him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground, his gun flying from his grasp. She walked over to him, her face an impassive mask. He clutched his shoulder, whimpering, looking up at her with the pleading eyes of a cornered animal. "Please," he sobbed. "Mercy. Did you show my husband mercy?" she asked, her voice as cold as the morning air. She raised her pistol, aiming it at his head. "No, please, I just followed orders." "It was the judge?" "It was all the judge," he babbled, his final act a cowardly betrayal of his master. "I know," Amelia said. She lowered the pistol slightly. "I want you to live, Sheriff. I want you to live long enough to crawl back to town. I want you to tell everyone what happened here. I want you to tell them who's next on my list. Tell them I'm coming for the banker, and then I'm coming for the judge." She turned and walked away, disappearing back into the mist as silently as she had appeared. She left him there, a broken, bleeding man, his authority shattered, his life spared only to serve as her messenger. She had not only defeated him physically, but she had utterly destroyed him, turning him into a living testament to her power and her purpose. The tin star was tarnished forever, and the shadow of the Silver Widow now fell squarely upon the gilded cage of the banker, Cyrus Blackwood. The return of Sheriff Brody to redemption was a pathetic spectacle that served Amelia's purpose more effectively than his death ever could have. He stumbled down the main street, not a lawman, but a broken, bleeding messenger of doom, his arm in a crude sling, his face a mask of terror. He babbled his story to anyone who would listen, a tale of a ghost in the mist, of deputies rooted, and of the widow's chilling promise. She was coming for the banker, Cyrus Blackwood, and then for the judge himself. Fear, once a tool used by the town's rulers, now turned against them. The citizens of redemption barred their doors, their loyalty to the judge's regime evaporating in the face of this implacable, seemingly supernatural force of justice. Cyrus Blackwood, the third man on Amelia's list, was a creature of a different breed. He was not a gunslinger like Jackson or a blunt instrument like Brody. He was a spider, sitting at the center of a web of numbers and deceit. His weapon was not a pistol, but a pen, and his crimes were hidden in the neat columns of his ledgers. The betrayal by Blackwood was, for Amelia, the most personal of all. He and his wife had been friends to her and Jacob. They had shared dinners, celebrated harvests. Blackwood had advised them on finances, his demeanor always one of avuncular concern. He had held their trust in his hand and had crushed it for a share of a dead man's gold. Blackwood reacted to the widow's threat not with bluster, but with calculated panic. He turned his bank into a fortress. He hired a trio of grim-faced private guards from out of town and had thick iron bars installed on his windows. He transformed his gilded cage into a literal one, hoping to wait out the storm. He trusted in iron and stone to protect him from a ghost. Amelia knew that a direct, armed assault on the bank would be folly. As with Brody, the attack on Blackwood had to be psychological, designed to dismantle the man before the final confrontation. Her target was the foundation of his entire world, his reputation and his money. She began by visiting his wife, Martha. She didn't come as the widow, but as Amelia Thorne, a ghost from a happier past. She found Martha in the town's small church, praying, her face pale and drawn. The woman gasped when she saw Amelia. "They told me you were dead," Martha whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "I am," Amelia said, her voice soft but filled with a sorrowful gravity. "The woman you knew died on her porch with her husband." I am what's left. She didn't make threats. She simply told the truth. She recounted the night of Jacob's murder, the role of the sheriff, and the chilling, undeniable fact of Cyrus's complicity in the fraudulent claim. Your husband helped murder mine for money, Martha. The silver bullet I have for him was forged from the wedding band he once admired. I just thought you, as my friend, deserved to know the truth before the end. She left a stunned, weeping Martha Blackwood in the church. The seed of doubt and horror she had planted in the banker's own home would fester, becoming a poison working from within his sanctuary. Next, she attacked his finances. Using the detailed knowledge Jacob had shared with her about the mine's operations, she began to subtly sabotage the Redemption Mining Consortium. A strategically placed rock slide, courtesy of Elias's lessons in demolition, blocked the main road to the mine for a week, halting shipments. A rumor, started in a distant town and carried back to Redemption, hinted that the consortium's claim was legally disputed, causing potential investors to pull back. These were small cuts, but they bled Blackwood's profits, causing Judge Thorne to apply pressure on his increasingly nervous partner. The final psychological blow was delivered through paper and ink. Amelia had a printer in a town 100 miles away create a fake edition of the Territorial Times. The headline was stark: Redemption Bank under federal investigation, Cyrus Blackwood accused of fraud, embezzlement. She had a lone writer drop a bundle of the papers in the center of town in the middle of the night. The effect was instantaneous. By morning, a panicked crowd had gathered outside the barred doors of the bank, demanding their money. The news was false, but in the climate of fear and distrust, it felt true. The town was turning on the banker. Trapped inside his fortress, besieged by his own depositors, and haunted by the tearful accusations of his wife, Cyrus Blackwood began to unravel. The cool, calculating man of numbers gave way to a paranoid, terrified wreck. On the third day of the siege, as a storm gathered over the mountains, Amelia made her move. She did not come to the front door. Coda, the Apache who had taught her to be a ghost, had also taught her about the weaknesses of white men's buildings. While all eyes were on the front of the bank, she used the storm's fury as cover. She scaled the rear wall to the roof, a place the guards would never think to watch. She pried open a skylight over the banker's opulent second-floor office and slipped inside, as silent as the falling rain. She waited for him in his own leather chair, the Colt with its silver bullet resting on the polished surface of his mahogany desk. When Blackwood entered his office, seeking refuge from the chaos below, he saw her. He froze, his face draining of all color. He saw not a woman, but an avenging angel, wreathed in shadows, the faint light from the skylight glinting on the silver bullet that lay waiting for him. Amelia, he stammered, his hand trembling. I can explain. Can you, Cyrus? She asked, her voice a low, chilling whisper in the quiet room. Can you explain why my husband is dead? Can you explain the friendship you betrayed? Can you explain the price of your soul? It was the judge, he squeaked, parroting Brody's cowardly defense. He forced me. I had no choice. There is always a choice, Amelia said, standing up slowly. You chose gold over a friend's life. You chose greed over honor. Jacob trusted you. He called you his friend. Her voice, for the first time, broke with the raw pain of that memory. I can give you money, he pleaded, scrambling behind his desk. Anything. Half of it. All of it. Just let me live. He fumbled in his desk drawer, not for a weapon, but for a bag of gold coins, which he spilled across the desk. A pathetic offering. Amelia looked at the gold, then at the man. She saw no remorse, only the terrified bargaining of a cornered rat. The moment of temptation, the offer of wealth, meant nothing to her. My husband's life was worth more than this, she said, her voice regaining its icy calm. She picked up her Colt. He finally, desperately, lunged for the pistol he kept in his drawer. It was a clumsy, frantic movement. Her own draw was serene, practiced, final. The shot, muffled by the thick walls and the raging storm outside, was a dull, heavy thud. The silver bullet, forged from her own wedding band, slammed into Blackwood's chest. He collapsed over his desk, his lifeblood mingling with the scattered gold coins, a final, grotesque portrait of his own greed. Amelia looked at the dead man, a former friend, and felt a profound, aching emptiness. This kill brought no satisfaction, only a deeper sense of the void that had opened in her life. She took the spent silver casing, placing it neatly on the stack of fraudulent documents that had sealed her husband's fate. She slipped back out through the skylight, leaving the dead banker to be discovered in his locked room, a mystery that would further cement her ghostly legend. The town spider was dead. His web was broken. Only one name remained on her list. The biggest, the most dangerous, the architect of all her pain, Judge Marcus Thorne. Her war was coming to its end, and the final payment would be the most costly of all. With Cyrus Blackwood dead in his gilded cage, the town of Redemption fell into a state of quiet, terrified paralysis. The structures of power that had governed their livest intimidating sheriff, the unassailable bank, had been decapitated by an unseen hand. All that remained was the head of the serpent, Judge Marcus Thorne. The judge, however, was not a man to be cowed by ghosts. He was a creature of absolute control, and in the face of this direct assault on his authority, he did not retreat. He fortified. Redemption transformed. The judge declared martial law. He used his vast wealth to hire a small army of professional gunslingers, hard-faced men from down on the border who had no loyalty to the town, only to the judge's coin. They patrolled the streets in trios, their rifles held at the ready, turning the once bustling town into an armed camp. Every citizen was a potential suspect, every shadow a potential threat. The judge himself retreated into his courthouse, a formidable stone building that he converted into a fortress, its windows sandbagged, with riflemen posted on the roof. He was daring the widow to come for him. He was turning the entire town into a killing ground. Amelia, watching from the hills, knew that her previous tactics of stealth and psychological warfare would not work against the judge. Thorne was not a man to be spooked by shadows or driven to panic. He was a grandmaster of the game, and he had just placed all his pieces on the board. A direct assault was suicide. She needed to step back, to breathe, to find a new strategy. She retreated to the cold, lonely sanctuary of Elias Thorne's mountain cabin. The old gunslinger was waiting for her, as if he knew she would return. He looked at her, and his weathered face was a mask of grim understanding. He saw the toll the campaign had taken on her. The woman who had left his cabin months ago had been fueled by the hot fire of fresh rage. The woman who returned was colder, harder, her eyes holding the bleak emptiness of a winter landscape. The hunt had honed her skills, but it had also eroded her soul. 3 down, he said, his voice a low rumble. Only the devil himself is left. He's turned the town into a fortress, Amelia said, slumping into a chair by the cold hearth. For the first time, she allowed the immense weight of her exhaustion to show. There are a dozen hired guns. I can't get close. Maybe that's for the best, Elias said quietly, stoking the embers in the fireplace. Maybe it's time to let this go. You've avenged your husband 3 times over. You've broken the back of Thorne's little empire. What's to be gained by throwing your life away against a barricaded courthouse? His words, meant to be comforting, struck a dissonant chord in her. She looked around the small, sparse cabin. She thought of the cold, lonely nights on the trail, the faces of the men she had killed, the constant, knowing presence of her grief. She had sacrificed everything, her home, her identity, her peace of mind for this single purpose. To stop now felt like a betrayal of that sacrifice. What's left of me if I'm not this? She asked, her voice a raw whisper. For months, the only thing that has kept me going is the thought of putting my last silver bullet in Judge Thorne. If I stop now, who am I? You're Amelia Thorne, Elias said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. A woman who loved her husband. A woman who deserved a life of peace. Vengeance is a fire, girl. It's kept you warm in the dark, but it's also burned away everything else. You kill Thorne, and the fire goes out. What then? You'll be left alone in the cold and the dark with nothing but the ghosts for company. Trust me, I know. His words painted a chillingly accurate picture of her own internal landscape. She was haunted. Jacob's memory, once a source of warmth and love, had become a cold, demanding specter urging her on. The faces of the men she'd killed visited her in her dreams. She was trapped in a cycle of violence, and she was terrified of what she would be if that cycle were to break. The solitude of the trail, once a comfort, now felt like a crushing, permanent sentence. A part of her, a small, weary voice she had long suppressed, yearned to listen to Elias. It yearned to take the horses and ride west, to leave the ghosts and the blood behind, to find a place where the name Amelia Thorne meant nothing. But the image of Judge Thorne, sitting in his courthouse, the man who had orchestrated her life's destruction with the stroke of a pen, was a barrier she could not overcome. Her quest had taken on a momentum of its own. It was no longer just about avenging Jacob. It had become a crusade against the absolute, corrupting power the judge represented. To let him win, to let him remain on his throne, felt like a larger injustice that she could not abide. "He can't be allowed to win," she said, her voice regaining its cold resolve. She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the unforgiving peaks. "It's not just for Jacob anymore. It's for the town he's bled dry. It's for anyone else who might have stood in his way. If I don't finish this, then all of this it was for nothing. I would just be a killer, not a purveyor of justice." Elias sighed, a sound of profound resignation. He had seen this before. The line between justice and vengeance had blurred until it was gone entirely. She had rationalized her hatred into a noble cause, the final, most dangerous stage of the disease. "So you're going back," he said. "I'm going back," she confirmed. "But not like before. I'm not going to sneak in. I'm going to knock on his front door." She knew that to defeat the judge, she couldn't just kill him. She had to dismantle his final defense, his illusion of legitimacy. He had barricaded himself behind the law. So she would have to bring a higher law to bear. She spent the next 2 days with Elias, not practicing her draw, but planning a strategy. It was a desperate, almost suicidal plan, one that relied not on stealth, but on open, audacious confrontation. She would use the town's fear, the very weapon Thorne was now wielding, against him. She would force him out from behind his walls, not by force of arms, but by the will of the people he had so long oppressed. As she prepared to leave for the final time, she took out the last, heavy silver bullet, the one meant for her rifle. She looked at it, gleaming in the firelight. It was the culmination of her journey, the physical embodiment of her pain and her purpose. Elias placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "If you do this," he said, "don't do it for the dead. Do it for the living. Do it so you can have a life after. Otherwise, you may as well use that last bullet on yourself when you're done." His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. A life after. It was a concept so foreign, so distant, she had never dared to contemplate it. For the first time, a sliver of light pierced the darkness of her obsession. What if this wasn't just an ending? What if it could be a beginning? The thought was both terrifying and intoxicating. She rode out from the mountains with a new, strange clarity. Her purpose was the same, her resolve just as firm. But for the first time, she was not just fighting to deliver an end to Judge Thorne. She was fighting for the chance to find her own beginning. The eye of the storm had passed, and the final, most violent part of the tempest was about to break upon the town of Redemption. Amelia's return to the outskirts of Redemption was not as a ghost, but as a general preparing her battlefield. She understood what Elias meant. To defeat a tyrant like Judge Thorne, she couldn't simply be a better killer, she had to offer a better idea. Thorne ruled through fear and the illusion of law. Amelia would counter with truth and the raw power of the people's will. Her plan was a high-stakes gamble, a piece of theater played out with live ammunition, designed to strip the judge of his power before she ever fired her final shot. Her first move was to break the information blockade Thorne had imposed on the town. The judge controlled the telegraph and intercepted the mail, ensuring his version of events was the only one heard. Amelia targeted the town's most natural and uncontrollable communication network, the church. The local preacher, Reverend Michael, was a timid man, but a good one, who had been privately horrified by the judge's tyrannical grip. One night, Amelia sought him out, not with threats, but with a plea. She found him in the vestry, preparing his Sunday sermon. He was terrified when he saw her. The legendary widow materialized in his sanctuary. "I am not here to bring violence to this house," Amelia said, her voice low and calm. "I am here to ask for your help to end it. The judge has wrapped himself in the law, but his foundation is a lie. I need you to give the people a voice. I need you to tell them the truth." She gave him the full story, supported by a copy of Jacob's original, legally filed claim that she had recovered from the abandoned homestead. She told him of Brody's confession, of Blackwood's treachery. On Sunday, she instructed, "Do not preach from the Bible. Preach the truth of this town. Tell them they have a choice. They can live on their knees under a murderer, or they can stand up and demand true justice. Her quiet conviction, and the undeniable truth in her evidence, stirred something in the timid preacher. He saw in her not a killer, but a desperate agent of a righteous wrath. He agreed. While the seed of rebellion was being planted, Amelia set about dismantling the judge's physical defenses. She couldn't take on his dozen hired guns in a direct fight, so she decided to demoralize them and turn them against their employer. She began a campaign of harassment. A sniper shot not from a gun, but from a powerful slingshot Elias had helped her make shattered the window of the saloon where the gunslingers drank. A rock wrapped in a note that read, "The judge's silver can't stop a widow's bullet. Leave now and live." At night, one of the guards on patrol would be suddenly and silently disarmed, finding himself face to face with a dark figure who would press a knife to his throat and whisper, "Is Thorne's money worth your life?" before melting back into the shadows, leaving the man shaken and weaponless. She never killed them. She was sowing fear and doubt, making them question the value of their contract. The final piece of her plan was the most audacious. She needed to create a symbol, a focal point for the town's simmering resentment. Judge Thorne's greatest source of pride was the massive, ornate statue of justice he had erected in the town square, a statue that, ironically, was blindfolded. It was a monument to his hypocrisy. With the help of a disgruntled blacksmith whose brother had been one of Thorne's many victims, Amelia forged a simple, heavy iron collar and chain. On the night before Sunday, while the now jumpy hired guns huddled in the saloon, Amelia and the blacksmith slipped into the town square. They placed the collar and chain around the neck of the statue of justice, making it look as though the very ideal of the law was now a prisoner in Thorne's town. To the chain, they affixed a simple, hand-painted sign, "Who will set her free?" The effect on Sunday morning was electric. The townspeople awoke to see the powerful, resonant symbol in the heart of their town. They gathered in the square, their whispers growing louder. The judge's men tried to disperse them, but the crowd, emboldened by the sheer audacity of the act, held their ground. Then the church bells began to toll. The crowd moved from the square to the church, filling the pews. Reverend Michael, his face pale but his voice ringing with a newfound courage, stood at the pulpit. He did not deliver his usual sermon. He read from the book of Exodus, of liberation from tyrants. Then he held up Jacob Thorne's claim and told the story of redemption's founding sin. He told them of the widow, not as a monster, but as a consequence of their own silence in the face of injustice. He ended with a simple, powerful question, gesturing toward the chained statue outside, "Who will set her free?" The sermon broke the dam of fear. The congregation spilled out of the church, their fear transformed into a righteous anger. They were no longer a collection of frightened individuals. They were a community, a mob. They marched toward the courthouse, their numbers swelling as shopkeepers and miners joined them. They carried no guns, only a shared, powerful sense of purpose. Judge Thorne, watching from his sandbagged window, saw his worst nightmare unfold. His army of gunslingers, faced with an entire town marching toward them, began to lose their nerve. This wasn't what they had been paid for. They were killers, not soldiers meant for riot control. A few fired warning shots into the air, but the crowd did not stop. This was the moment Amelia was waiting for. As the confrontation between the people and the hired guns reached its peak, a rifle shot cracked from the roof of the general store opposite the courthouse. It was not aimed at the crowd. It was aimed at the leader of the gunslingers. The heavy silver bullet, the last on her list, struck the man in the chest, sending him toppling from the courthouse steps. The shot, and the sight of their leader falling to a bullet that seemed to come from nowhere, shattered the mercenaries' resolve. This was a fight they could not win. They were caught between a vengeful phantom and an angry mob. They threw down their guns and fled, abandoning their employer. Judge Thorne was alone. His hired army had deserted him. The people were at his door. His fortress had become his prison. The widow had not breached his walls with force, but had brilliantly and systematically stripped them away, leaving him exposed. The crowd fell silent as a lone figure descended from the rooftop, rifle in hand. It was the widow. She walked through the parted crowd, who looked at her with awe and reverence. She stopped at the steps of the courthouse, the stage now cleared for the final act. "Thorne," her voice rang out, clear and powerful. "Your army is gone. Your town has turned against you. Your lies are broken. Come out and face your accuser. Come out and face the justice you've pretended to represent. The heavy doors of the courthouse remained closed. The judge, the ultimate coward, was hiding. Very well, Amelia said. If the law won't come out, I'm coming in. She turned to the blacksmith. The door. The blacksmith and a half-dozen other strong men picked up a heavy wooden beam left by the fleeing mercenaries. The siege of the courthouse was about to begin, not with an army, but with the raw, undeniable power of the people's will. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse, once a symbol of Judge Thorne's impenetrable authority, shuddered under the first blow of the makeshift battering ram. The sound boomed through the town square, a rhythmic, percussive heartbeat counting down the final moments of the judge's reign. The crowd, now a unified force, roared with each impact, their voices a single, powerful wave of anger and hope. Inside, Judge Marcus Thorne, a man who had orchestrated the lives and deaths of others from the comfort of his leather chair, was now a cornered animal. The meticulously constructed world of control he had built was literally being battered down around him. Amelia did not join the men at the door. She stood back, her rifle held loosely in her hands, her eyes scanning the sandbagged windows of the upper floor. She knew Thorne. He was not a man to surrender. He was a creature of pride and vicious self-preservation. He would not go down without a fight, and he would not fight fair. Her battle was not with the door, it was with the men hiding behind it. The doors finally splintered and burst inward with a crash of splintered wood and torn metal. The crowd surged forward, but Amelia held up a hand. "Stay back," she commanded, her voice cutting through the din. "This is my cross to bear." The townsfolk, respecting her authority, halted at the threshold, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. They had broken the fortress, now they would bear witness to the final judgment. Amelia stepped through the ruined doorway into the cavernous main hall of the courthouse. The room was dark, the windows blocked, the only light filtering down from the high dome in the ceiling, illuminating swirling dust motes in the air. It was eerily silent. At the far end of the hall, the judge's bench stood like a dark, imposing altar. "Thorne," she called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. "There are no more hired guns. No more lies. It's just you and me." There was no answer, only the sound of her own breathing. She began to walk slowly, cautiously, down the central aisle, her rifle at the ready. She checked the empty offices on either side. He was not on the ground floor. That meant he was upstairs, in his chambers, or waiting in ambush. As she reached the base of the grand, curving staircase that led to the second floor, a gunshot exploded from the shadows of the upper landing. The bullet splintered the wooden newel post next to her head, showering her with splinters. It was not a rifle shot. It was a shotgun. A weapon of brutal, close-quarters devastation. Amelia dove for cover behind an overturned table, her heart hammering. The judge had the high ground and a weapon that could tear her apart. This was not going to be a clean, high-noon duel. This was going to be a bloody, desperate fight for survival. "You should have stayed a ghost, Mrs. Thorne." The judge's voice boomed from above, a voice stripped of its judicial calm and now laced with a raw, snarling fury. "I built this town. I am the law. I will not be undone by a vengeful shrew." Another shotgun blast ripped through the air, chewing up the table she was hiding behind. She knew she couldn't stay there. She had to move, to change the dynamics of the fight. While he reloaded, she scrambled from behind the table and sprinted for the side offices, her boots echoing on the marble floor. She slipped into the clerk's office, the windows of which looked out onto the town square. She had an idea. It was a risk, but it was her only chance. She took off her hat and duster, placing them over a chair near the doorway, creating a crude decoy. Then she smashed the window leading out to a small stone balcony. "Giving up so soon?" Thorne mocked from above. Amelia climbed out onto the balcony. The crowd below gasped as they saw her. She was now exposed, a clear target. But this was part of the plan. She raised her rifle and fired, not at the courthouse, but at the general store across the square. The bullet shattered the glass of a large lantern hanging on the store's porch. The lantern fell, and a pool of burning oil began to spread across the wooden planks. She was creating a second front, a distraction. The crowd, seeing the fire, fell into a state of panicked confusion. Inside, Judge Thorne, hearing the commotion, would be forced to wonder what she was doing to divide his attention. As he peered over the railing to see the source of the chaos, Amelia climbed from the balcony back up to the roof of the courthouse, using the ornate stonework as handholds. It was a perilous, desperate climb. She was now on his level. She moved across the roof as silently as a cat, her rifle slung over her back, her Colt now in her hand. She found the access hatch that led down into the attic space above the courtroom. She lowered herself into the hot, dusty darkness, her senses on high alert. She could hear him moving below her, in his chambers, which were adjacent to the courtroom. She crept across the attic rafters, positioning herself directly above his office. She lay flat, peering through a crack between the floorboards. She could see him. He was at his window, his shotgun resting on the sill, his attention focused on the fire and the chaos in the square below. He was so consumed by the external threat, he had forgotten the one that was right above his head. Amelia did not shoot him in the back. That was not her way. This had to be face to face. She holstered her pistol and drew the heavy hunting knife Elias had given her. She began to methodically, quietly, pry at one of the floorboards. The old wood groaned, but the sounds were masked by the shouting from the crowd. Finally, a section of the board came loose. She had an opening. She waited. Thorne turned from the window, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He believed she was trapped outside, her plan in ruins. Foolish woman, he muttered to himself. The fool is the man who mistakes greed for weakness, Judge, Amelia's voice said, seemingly coming from the ceiling itself. Thorne looked up, his face a mask of shocked disbelief. In that instant, Amelia dropped through the opening she had created, landing in a crouch on the floor of his office, not 10 feet from him. She held only the knife. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The judge, his shotgun out of reach, and the widow, armed with a primitive, personal weapon. The fight for the soul of redemption would not be decided by a bullet, but by a blade. With a roar of pure rage, Thorne lunged at her, his bulk and fury his only weapons. The final, brutal, hand-to-hand struggle for justice had begun. The fight in Judge Thorne's chambers was not a duel. It was a savage, primal brawl. The confines of the room, cluttered with law books and heavy oak furniture, became a brutal arena. Thorne, stripped of his shotgun and his judicial poise, was a cornered bear, lashing out with surprising strength and ferocity. He overturned his massive desk, sending books and papers flying, trying to crush Amelia beneath it. She dodged, her movements lean and quick, a product of her hard life and harder training. He was bigger, stronger, but she was faster, more agile, and fueled by a decade's worth of refined hatred. She used his rage against him, letting him exhaust himself in furious, clumsy charges. She fought not like a woman, but like a wolf, using the knife in short, sharp slashes to keep him at bay, drawing blood from his arms and shoulders, weakening him, maddening him. "You are nothing," he roared, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, his tailored suit now torn and stained. "A speck of dust. I am the foundation of this territory. You're a murderer and a thief," Amelia hissed back, circling him, her eyes never leaving his. "And foundations built on bones always crumble." He finally managed to corner her, trapping her against a tall bookshelf. He grabbed for her throat, his large hands closing like a vice. Her hair was cut off, black spots dancing in her vision. For a second, she felt the cold touch of her own mortality. But the image of Jacob's face, falling on the porch, flashed in her mind. It was not a memory of grief, but a surge of pure, unadulterated power. With a final, desperate burst of strength, she drove the hilt of her knife up into the underside of his jaw. The blow was stunningly brutal. He cried out a choked, gurgling sound, his grip loosening as he staggered back, his hand flying to his shattered jaw. In that moment, she broke free. She scrambled for her Colt, which had fallen during the struggle. Thorne, recovering with a feral roar, dove for the shotgun he had left leaning against the wall. They both came up with their weapons at the same time. They were across the room from each other, at a blow of mutual destruction. The judge, his face a bloody mask of hatred, and the widow, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with a cold, white-hot fire. The shotgun boomed, its blast deafening in the enclosed space. The spread of buckshot tore through the room, shredding law books, pulverizing a globe of the world, and ripping a chunk of plaster from the wall just inches from Amelia's head. She felt the searing heat of the pellets fly past her cheek. But in the fraction of a second it took him to aim and fire the heavy weapon, she had already acted. Her draw was the one she had practiced 10,000 times, the one that had become a part of her soul. The Colt felt like an extension of her will. She didn't fire. Not yet. This was not for Jackson, or Brody, or Blackwood. This was for Jacob. And it had to be done right. "This was my husband's," she said, her voice eerily calm in the ringing silence after the shotgun blast. She held up the rifle she had retrieved from the floor. "He was a good man. He believed in the law. He believed in men like you." She cocked the hammer. The sound, a simple, mechanical click, was the loudest thing in the world. "This is the last silver bullet, Judge," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "A gift from him." Thorne, his shotgun now empty, fumbled desperately for the shells on his belt. He was too slow. The rifle cracked. It was a single, clean, definitive sound. The heavy silver bullet, the one forged from all the remnants of her past, flew true. It struck Judge Marcus Thorne directly in the center of his chest, where his heart should have been. The force of the impact threw him backward through the large window of his office, the one that overlooked the town square he had ruled for so long. For a moment, his body was framed against the sky, a dark silhouette of shattered justice. Then he fell, crashing down onto the steps of his own courthouse, landing in a broken heap at the feet of the chained statue. Silence. A profound, absolute silence fell over the town square. The crowd below, who had heard the struggle and the final gunshot, stared in stunned disbelief at the body of their fallen tyrant. Amelia walked slowly to the shattered window. She looked down at the scene below. Her quest was over. The list was complete. The final payment had been made. She looked at the rifle in her hands, then let it drop to the floor. The fire that had sustained her, the burning rage, and the icy resolve, was gone. And in its place, as Elias had predicted, was a vast, cold, and terrifying emptiness. She had won. She had brought a monster to justice. She had freed a town. But as she stood there, alone in the wreckage of the tyrant's office, she felt a sorrow so profound it threatened to swallow her whole. She had paid her debts in silver, but the price to her own soul, she was just beginning to understand, was incalculable. The aftermath of Judge Thorne's death was not triumphant. It was quiet, dazed. The people of redemption stood in the square, looking at the body of the man who had been their absolute ruler, and then up at the lone, weary figure of the woman in the shattered window of the courthouse. They did not cheer. They were like prisoners who, after years in darkness, were blinking in the sudden, harsh light of freedom, and sure what to do with it. They had been freed, but the scars of their captivity remained. Amelia walked down the grand staircase, stepping over the debris of her battle. She walked through the ruined doorway and out onto the courthouse steps. The crowd parted for her, a silent sea of faces filled with all fear and a dawning respect. She was not one of them, not anymore. She was something other, a living legend, a ghost who had walked among them to settle a terrible score. She went to the chained statue of justice. The blacksmith handed her a hammer, and with a single, resonant blow, she shattered the iron link. The chain fell away. It was a symbolic act, but a necessary one. Her war was over. The town's future was now in its own hands. She did not linger. She knew there was nothing for her here, only ghosts and painful memories. Her horse was waiting where she had left it. As she prepared to mount, the preacher, Reverend Michael, approached her. "What you did here today, Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice filled with a quiet conviction. "It was a terrible thing, but it was a necessary thing. You have given this town a second chance. A chance to build on truth. What they build is up to them," Amelia said, her voice tired. "I only tore down the rotten foundation." "And what of you?" he asked. "Will you find peace?" Amelia looked out at the vast, open plain stretching to the horizon. "Peace is a luxury I don't know if I've earned, Reverend," she said. "But I'm going to look for it." She swung into the saddle. She took one last look at the town, at the faces of the people she had, in her own dark way, liberated. Then she turned her horse west and rode away, not looking back. She did not ride to the mountains, to the cold comfort of Elias's cabin. That life, the life of the vengeful widow, was over. She rode towards the sunset, towards the unknown. The The legend of the Silver Widow became one of the great and settled tales of the West. Some said she disappeared into the territories, a phantom of justice who would occasionally appear to right a great wrong, always leaving a single, then silver casing as her only sign. Others said she rode all the way to the ocean and found a quiet life, the violence of her past washed away by the tides. The truth was simpler, and in its own way, more profound. Amelia Thorne rode until the name of redemption was just a faint echo in her memory. She found a small, fertile valley in a territory where no one knew her name or her story. There, she shed the identity of the widow like a snake sheds its skin. She did not build a home, not at first. She worked, she healed, she learned to live with the ghosts who would always ride with her. She never again touched the firearm. The silver bullets were gone, her debt was paid. She had walked through the deepest hell of vengeance and had, by some miracle of will, found her way out the other side. She didn't find the same happiness she had known with Jacob. That was a chapter of her life that was written and closed. But she found something else. A quiet strength. A hard-won peace. She had learned the terrible truth that justice bought with blood leaves a permanent stain on the soul. Her legend would forever belong to the dust and violence of the West, but her life, the one she chose to live from that day forward, finally, blessedly, belonged only to her.